Sibongwe. Dumela. Sanbonani. Abhishek. Dimasiare. Kuyemeda. Molweni. Ke a leboga. Ke thabile gagolo go ba mo Vryburg, Mona Lady. Program directors, Minister Togo Didiza, the MEC Virginia Tsotso Tapi. Ke dumedise the Minister in the Presidency for Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, Minister Maite Ngwana Mashabane. Ke dumedise the Minister tsa mmuso wa rona le di Deputy Minister tse teng mo gare ga rona, Premier wa Bokone Bophirima, Professor Tebogo Job Mokgoro, Premier wa rona wa ko Northern Cape Dr. Zamani Sol, Sibui sa National Assembly Mme Thandi Modise o thakgang gona fa. Ke dumedise le ausi wa rona o emetseng UN Women, the MEC tsa rona, the Mayor of Ruth Mompati District Municipality. Ke dumedise ka pelo e tshweu Presidente wa ANC Women's League Mme Bathabile Dlamini. Ke dumedise ka pelo e tshweu Secretary General wa ANC Women's League Mme Meokgo Matuba. And fellow South Africans and all of us who are here, it is indeed an honor to be here to commemorate National Women's Day in the birthplace of one of our greatest heroes, Isithwalandwe Siaparangwe Dr. Ruth Sekgomotsi Mompati Maruta. Maruta was a stalwart of the liberation movement, a freedom fighter and a committed gender activist. She was among the great leaders of her generation. In many ways, she was a visionary leader, a very courageous freedom fighter. She answered to a higher calling, to be of service to humanity without expectation of any form of recognition or reward. She was one of the women of which our young star poet Koleka Putuma wrote, open quotes, I said, a lineage of greatness is born. Women who have stood on the front lines of battlefields, yielded their present for the future of others, close quotes. Earlier this morning, we laid a wreath at the grave of Mme Ruth Mompati, together with her family. We went there to pay our respects, but we also went there to draw strength from her memory. We salute the resilience and the strength and the power of those courageous women who sacrificed so much that we should be free. I've always been humbled each time I've heard the account from a number of the brave women who participated in the march on the Union buildings in 1956 on the 9th of August. Whenever I've heard their accounts from Mary Ruth, Mary Sisulu, and many others, I've always been deeply humbled. Mary Sophie de Bruyn could not join us today as she was meant to, but we keep her in a memory and wish her strength. The women who marched on the Union buildings had said to Straydom as they were marching and even composed the song, "You have tempered with the women, you have struck a rock." So the song was composed to mark this historic occasion. By the middle of 1956, plans had been laid for the Pretoria March, and the women's organization had written to request that J.G. Straydom, the then Prime Minister, meet with their leaders so that they could present their point of view about their total rejection, not only of the past system which was being imposed on our sisters and mothers and grandmothers, but also about apartheid and the effects that it was having on the people of our country. Their request was refused. The ANC then sent Helen Joseph and Mabetha Mashaba on a tour of the main urban areas, accompanied by Robert Gesha of the ANC and Norman Levy of the Congress of Democrats. The plan was to consult with local leaders who would then make arrangements to send delegates to the mass gathering in August of 1956. It is reported that the Women's March was a spectacular success. Women from all corners of our country arrived in Pretoria, some as far afield as Cape Town, Port Elizabeth, further flung areas in Northwest, Northern Cape, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, KZN, and many other places. They then flocked to the Union buildings in a determined yet orderly manner. They traveled in buses, they traveled in trains, in cars, in taxis, and what was fueling them was their determination to ensure that the past system is stopped and that apartheid is ended. Estimates of the number of women delegates were that there were 20,000 women. And imagine 20,000 women in 1956. It was a lot of people. It was possibly the biggest demonstration yet held against the apartheid regime. They filled the entire amphitheater of the Union buildings, and they said it created a most impressive scene of these thousands of women who had gathered to strike against the apartheid regime. Many of the women wore their traditional clothes. Others wore the Congress colors, the ANC colors, green, black, and gold. Indian women wore clothes in their white saris. Many women had babies on their backs, and some domestic workers brought their white employers' children along with them. Utsho gore le bana ba makgowa ba ile ba tliswa mo marching ba marcha against mmuso wa apartheid. I actually once met an old woman who has since passed away, who told me that she was a domestic worker and she went to this march, and because her employer had expected her to look after the children, she took the two white children along with her to the march. So was their determination. Throughout the demonstration, the huge crowd displayed discipline and dignity, and it is said that it was most impressive. Now, neither the Prime Minister or any of his senior staff was there to see the women. So as they had done so in previous years, but they had not been prepared to be there. But the women, and we can see the pictures that we now have historically of the women, Ma Lillian Goyi, Helen Joseph, and Umama Sophie de Brain, handing over the petitions that had been signed from all over the country, handing them over to the officials at the union buildings. And they left them outside J.G. Stradom's office door. It later transpired that they were removed before he bothered to look at them. Then, at Lillian Goyi's suggestion, a masterful tactic for that matter, the huge crowd that had gathered there stood in absolute silence for half an hour. Before leaving, the women sang Nkosi Sigelela i-Afrika. Without exception, those who participated in the event described it as a moving and an emotional experience. The Federation of the Women's Organization then declared that it was a monumental achievement. It is in the honor of these gallant women, our mothers, our sisters, our aunts, our grandmothers, that today we have a national holiday to commemorate that historic contribution that was made by the women of our country. And that is why today we enjoy the freedom that they fought for. Today, as we pay tribute and as we fondly remember what these women did on the 9th of August in 1956, we know that we can never pay them or reward them enough or say thank you enough for the sacrifices that they made. But today we also pay tribute to the present generation who have taken up the baton of struggle towards a truly non-sexist and egalitarian society. We have many women in our nation who are blazing the trail, a trail that should lead our country towards an era where we will bring patriarchy to an end, where we will bring discrimination against women to an end, and where we will ensure that all the horrible things that we men do against women are brought to an end. The number of women are blazing a trail in the workplace and in the boardrooms, in our factories and on our farms, in our parliament and in civil society organizations as well. They are pathfinders, like Dr. Mary Jane Bupape, the Chief Scientist for Weather Research at the South African Weather Service, who is leading a specialist team to produce this country's first ever weather and climate change modeling system. They are farming specialists like Mabatu Murudi from right here in the Northwest, whose farm in Winterveld offers free BEE or bee pollination services to rural farmers. Yadi Notsi. They are entrepreneurs like nuclear scientist Nomsakana, whose company manufactures fiber optic cables that are critical for the rollout of broadband infrastructure. They are researchers like University of Western Cape graduate student Shireen Mento, who grew up witnessing the ravages of drug abuse in her community of Mannenberg and is now conducting groundbreaking research into the effects of substance abuse on the brain of a human being. They are tech industry leaders like Zandile Kibeni, whose organization Girl Code hosts coding clubs and whose workshops for high school girls teaches basic computer literacy to unemployed women. Yes, they are like the women of Banyana Banyana, who are on a winning streak and have just scored their way into the COSAFA final. Babang Banalehori, Santori, Banyana Banyana, Ido Ruta, Bafana Bafana, Otamika Ball. Kaobani, Kiba Sitana Fela, Bakonang will score 17 goals in one match. Bafana Bafana has never done that. So Banyana Banyana must go and coach Bafana Bafana. All these women and many more like them are changing South Africa for the better. Really, for those who do not have ears and eyes, they must just look at what the women of our country are doing and achieving and how they are changing things wherever they are deployed. We pay tribute today to the women of our country, and we respect them for their courage and their prowess in many areas of life. They are shining examples of the strides that our country has made since democracy and of the ever greater heights we are yet to attain. Fellow South Africans, as we mark 25 years of democracy, we can say with certainty that we have made a real difference in the lives of women. We have implemented policies and programs to give practical expression to women's rights to education, to health care, to basic services, and social support. Today, 58% of all students that are enrolled in universities and colleges around the country are women. Let me repeat this. 58% ya bao ba kenang di university tsa rona le ba kenang di college tsa rona ke basetsana. They are young women who are going to our education institutions. This is a major development in our country, as having opened the doors of learning since the end of apartheid, we are finding gladly that we have opened those doors much more to the women of our country. And may this continue to be the trend as we move forward. 47% of members of parliament in our parliament are women. This year, we achieved 50-50 gender parity amongst the cabinet ministers of our cabinet. Yanong eo isi isentswe fela ke banna ba babedi. Isentswe ke president le deputy president. Otherwise, we would have had 50% ya cabinet kaofela. But we know there can be no true liberation of women unless they are economically empowered. And that is why our theme today is that let us grow South Africa together by economically empowering the women of our country. That is where our efforts must be, to empower the people who not only bring life into this world, but the people who care for the life that is brought into this world, who nurture it, and who look after our families. They are the ones that we must focus our economic efforts on. For generations, black women in particular have carried the greatest burden of apartheid dispossession and deliberate underdevelopment. Today, that legacy continues, unfortunately, but it is worsened by the dire economic situation that our country faces at this point in time. Well over 10 million South Africans, men and women, are unemployed. This is a major crisis that is facing our country right now. Our economy has not been growing at the level at which we should be able to create more jobs. The public finances of our country are severely constrained. Yet while our economy is in crisis, we are by no means powerless as a people. Because if we work together with partners in business, in labor, in communities, across civil society organization, we will be able to take measures to restore our economy and create economic opportunities, especially for women and the youth. What I can assure us all is that we are working together with all our social partners to try to come to grips with the economic situation that currently faces us and addressing all the challenges that we face, from Eskom, to the national debt of our nation, to unemployment, and to the disempowerment of our women and black people in general. So all these things we are addressing and will be able to come out with clearer answers and interventions that will be able to take us forward. We are at the same time implementing a revitalized industrial strategy in support of key growth sectors in our economy with the greatest potential to create jobs. We are finalizing the establishment of the new infrastructure fund with a clear plan to revive investment in infrastructure, and in fact a number of projects are already finalized and they are about to be given the press button. We are implementing a range of interventions to ease the cost of doing business and making South Africa a competitive investment destination. We are also working to expand the number of small businesses to improve their success rate through greater support and creating space for new market entrants. But we are also addressing the issues, the areas where our real economy functions at the local government level. Kaobane ha batho ba batla ho investa madi tjhelete a ba ise ko union buildings ba itlisa mo batho ba dulang teng mo di business di leng teng mo masipala a leng teng. So re leka go lokisa bo masipala ba rona gore ba be bo masipala ba tla sebeletsang setjhaba sentle ba etse sure gore le di business di kgone ho tswella pele. It is in this area that we are going to give more focus. Re tla re ha re lokisa bo masipala re tla ba re sebedisa approach ya district. Re tla ba re tla mo districting yona e ya Ruth Mompati district municipality re tlo go lokisa gona fa gore dintho di tsamaye sentle. Women generally are disproportionately affected by unemployment and are in the lowest earning categories, making them vulnerable to poverty. So the initiatives that we need to embark on must be initiatives that should be focused on empowering the women of our country and dealing with the biggest challenge that they face, unemployment and poverty. According to the figures released last week by Statistics South Africa, the expanded unemployment rate among women stands at 42.5%, whilst it stands at 35% amongst men, meaning that women are more greatly affected. As we look at the incidence of unemployment, it is the women of our country who suffer the greatest brunt. It is therefore critical that as we implement measures to address the jobs crisis in this country, we give special attention to the economic situation of the women of our country. As we implement the agreements of last year's job summit, we are working to ensure that we overcome the disadvantages that women confront in the world of work. We held a report back almost 10 days ago on the job summit, interventions that were made to embark on. And I then felt that we need to demonstrate that we are prepared to tackle the situation of unemployment, which affects all our people, but especially women. And I said that every month, the first Monday of every month, I want to have a meeting with the key ministers of the economy, with labor, with business and communities at NEDLEC, and we must look at the employment figures in a very specific manner so that we are able to bring about change. So we are going to light a torch on the issue of unemployment much more broadly to see which sectors are losing jobs and what we should do to stem the tide of job losses, to see which sectors are gaining jobs and what we should do to increase the level of job creation in those sectors. We are now determined, much more determined, to make sure that we address the job crisis in our country in a much frontal manner and do so in an effective way by meeting every first Monday of every week. I've said I want the figures, the specific figures. I guess about the uka mabare bare, about the uka for Now the empowerment of women remains an important part of our employment equity as well as our broad-based black economic empowerment policies. As we expand our work in special economic zones, we will have a specific program to support women's participation across the value chain and bring more women into the Black Industrialist Program. And this is where I would like to see more women participating so that they emerge as industrialists. I was particularly impressed this morning as we were going around the stalls. Ke kopane le bo OC ba leng in mining, bo OC ba kenang mokoting underground, le bo OC who are in construction. And those are the women who are proving to be courageous, who are going to areas where many have never gone before. Ke leboge bo OC le bo mme bao ba agileng ntlo e premier ana bua ka yona. Those women from construction, we thank you for the wonderful work you did to build one of our families here a house. The efforts that we are going to make are going to increase pace. This Black Industrialist Program, although only 5 years old, has already achieved its 5-year target for women entrepreneurs. It has approved 6.6 billion rand for women-owned businesses against a target of 4.4 billion. Over the last 4 years, our state-owned enterprises has spent a total of 100 billion rand on goods and services that they have purchased from women-owned businesses. We are focusing now on ensuring that through the policy instruments that we have, we are able to empower the women of our country, as well as the youth. The state-owned enterprises also have a crucial contribution to make in providing young women with the skills that they need to succeed in a changing economy. In the last year, state-owned enterprises enrolled over 2,700 female learners in training programs to become artisans, technicians, and engineers. Cabinet recently approved the Gender Response Planning and Budgeting Monitoring Evaluation and Auditing Framework. Under this framework, all government plans and budgets will have to include gender-specific delivery targets. Every government department, they must focus on how this is going to impact on a gender-specific delivery target. And this we are going to make sure gets done, because we have already seen the benefits from this. These commitments will be written into the performance agreements that ministers and deputy ministers, premiers and directors generals are going to have. An example is the procurement target set by the Department of Social Development in partnership with the National Development Agency. In the coming financial year, 124 million rand will be set aside from the Social Relief of Distress Program for procuring goods and services from women and youth-owned cooperatives and small businesses. Now, I want to see this number growing by leaps and bounds. Now, we have decided unless we make these the requirements, we will never be able to successfully empower the women and the youth of our nation. One area in which we have the greatest impact on improving the lives of women, especially rural women, is in access to and ownership of land. Now, as we proceed with our land reform program, we must and will confront the issue that we are sometimes reluctant to speak about, that women are being denied the right to own land in the name of culture and tradition. Now, this has to be addressed, and this has to be brought to an end. There is no reason that the women of our country cannot own land. There is no reason that they cannot also work the land. This is unacceptable, especially in a country with a constitution that guarantees equality between men and women. To the women of the Northwest and around the country, in our villages, in our farms, and in our cities, I have a message for you today. We will respect and enforce your rights to land. Now, where there are deficiencies in law with regard to the implementation of these rights, we will correct those. Now, we call upon all our people to walk this journey with us, to fully empower our women so that they are treated equally with all South Africans. The Freedom Charter promised that the land shall be shared amongst those who work it, and this includes Bo Me, Bo Osi, Bo Mama, Bo Nkhono, and all of you who are here. And this must get done. Let us agree here that we will realize the economic liberation of the women of our country in our lifetime. We will also correct whatever is standing in the way of this nation's women and girls enjoying quality and accessible health care, including reproductive health care. In 1994, in one of the first acts of President of a newly democratic South Africa, President Mandela declared that pregnant women and children under the age of 6 would receive free health care in public facilities, and it happened. He did this because he knew that access to quality health care is fundamental to improving the lives of women. We have heard your concerns here in the Northwest about the poor quality of service at our hospitals and our clinics. Re utlwile gore mo dipetleleng le mo ditleliniking ke mathata hela. Eo re utlwile sentle. Now, under Premier Mokgoro's leadership, we are working to turn this whole situation around, to ensure that women and girls receive the best primary and health care. Just over 2 weeks ago, we signed the Presidential Healthcare Compact with stakeholders across the health sector on a series of measures to significantly improve the quality of health care that our people are receiving. We are going to ensure that women and girls are direct beneficiaries of the National Health Insurance once it is implemented. Our Minister of Health, Dr. Mkhize, has already tabled the bill in Parliament after it was approved by Cabinet. It is now soon going to be the law of the land. All of these interventions are to ensure that the women of this country are healthy, that their needs are responded to, and that the doors of opportunities are open to them. Bagaethu is saying that no woman who is a mother or a grandmother can leave home to work if her children are not being properly cared for in a safe environment that supports learning. In the past financial year, we have provided funding for nearly 700,000 children to attend early childhood development centers across the country. Through the Early Childhood Development Conditional Grant, we also subsidize over 60,000 vulnerable children and want to double this number over the next 5 years. Through the Isibindi project, we are assisting communities with caring for orphaned and vulnerable children, such as applying for birth certificates, assisting with clinics, visits, and offering study support. I was greatly touched by the story of Sharon Chitale, who was helped by the program when she lost her mother at the age of 10 and had nobody to care for her. Today, she is studying for her BCom at a university and is giving back to her community as a mentor. It takes a village to raise a child, and the mothers and grandmothers of our nation should know that we will continue to do everything within our means to support them. Gender-based violence is a crisis across our land. It is the worst form of desecration of the Constitution and its premise of gender equality in our country. Since 1994, we have passed laws to curb domestic violence and sexual violence. We have set up specialized courts and units within the South African Police Service to ensure that perpetrators of violence against women and children are successfully prosecuted. We are providing shelter and support services for women and girls who have fled from abuse. Despite our best efforts, despite our progressive laws and policies, this country's women and girls continue to live in fear. On the streets, in the schools, in universities, in churches, in places of worship, and worst of all, in their own homes, many women in our country live in fear. We must acknowledge here, as we have in the past, the stubborn persistence of patriarchy that leads men to think that they are superior to the women of our country, to their mothers, to their wives and their daughters, is something that is still a great problem in our country. We must acknowledge here, as we have in the past, that many men assume that they have the right to decide whether or not a girl should go to school, or how a woman should dress, or how a woman should behave. These attitudes are driving the abuse of women across society, whether they are young or old, black or white, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, atheist, rural or urban, gender conforming or non-gender conforming. As South Africans, we can no longer stand by as this evil sinks deeper and deeper roots in our society. Since government and society adopted the Declaration Against Gender-Based Violence and Femicide last year, we have made a number of advances. A gender-based violence steering team committee will soon begin provincial consultations on the National Strategic Plan to end gender-based violence in our country. The Department of Justice is in the process of amending the National Policy Framework on the Management of Sexual Offences. We are reviewing the Domestic Violence Act to strengthen its provisions around domestic homicide and the enforcement of protection orders. The proposed amendments will also include previously marginalized victims, such as members of the LGBTIQ+ community. We all have a responsibility to end gender-based violence. Now, as men become partners in abuse, or rather, as men, we become partners in abuse when we remain silent, as other men use money or violence to dominate their girlfriends or their wives. As parents, as grandparents, as uncles and aunts, let us rid ourselves of old attitudes that value boys over girls. One of our country's greatest tragedies is that far too many children grow up without their fathers. I have seen the beautiful Women's Day tribute to Gogo Nosizwe that is trending on social media, and I found it quite moving. Hers is a story of millions of our hardworking mothers and grandmothers who raise children alone and with great hardship. As men, let us step up and become better fathers to our children and play an active role in their lives. Let us support great initiatives like #TheBestManCanBe, a male mentorship program being run by the creators of Gogo Nozizwe commercial. As sexual partners, let us care enough for each other to practice safe sex. As all South Africans, let us condemn violence against the LGBTIQ+ community, including the abominable crime of so-called corrective rape. As traditional leaders, let us educate our people against child marriages and discriminatory practices that prevent women from owning property or land. I've made a call for all sectors of society to come together and develop a social compact to help us solve our country's challenges. There is a South Africa that we all want, a South Africa that Mayor Ruth Mompati and the women of a generation fought for, a South Africa where women are free from discrimination and subjugation, from violence and oppression, and are given the means to uplift themselves and their families. As government, labor, the private sector and civil society, we must work together to drive women's empowerment and to ensure that women are given the meaningful opportunities that is rightfully theirs. We call on the private sector to open up more spaces for women, especially young women, to enable them to enter the job market. We call on you to roll out more training programs as the private sector to have more internships, more mentorships, and to work with our colleges and universities to offer more bursaries to female students, especially in critical skills needed by our economy. We call on the private sector to open up positions that have historically been held by men and open them up for women to show and demonstrate their excellence in those positions. It is when we have the courage and the foresight to empower the women of our country that South Africa will grow even much better than we are even envisaging. We also call on the private sector to join hands with the South African Police Service and the NGOs in our country to improve victim support centers at our police stations and at our hospitals and clinics. We call on labor and civil society to deepen their activism to ensure that equal pay for equal work is enforced. There are still places where when women and men do equal work of the same type, same nature, they continue to pay men more. And we are saying this must come to an end. And in fact, I think we should begin to think of a piece of legislation that will make this illegal. Because there is no reason that when people are doing equal work, they do not get equal pay. And the discrimination is always against women and black people. This must come to an end, and we will end it. We also call upon labor and civil society to ensure that women are protected from harassment in the workplace, to also make sure that the national minimum wage is applied and that vulnerable groups such as domestic workers are afforded greater protection. On this National Women's Day, fellow South Africans, we pay homage to the generations who came before us, who lit the path to our freedom. Let us be the generation that will end sexism. Let us be the generation that will end patriarchy. Let us be that generation that will bring an end to violence against women in all its forms. This is something that is possible, and we can do it. Let us be that generation that realizes the emancipation economically of the women of our country. Let us today commit to doing our part to realize that South Africa that we want. A South Africa of equal opportunity, a prosperous South Africa, a South Africa that has a good measure of peace for women and for the men of our country, and that is something that we should commit ourselves to on this day as we commemorate the women of 1956 who marched against a formidable foe, the apartheid regime. Today we can ensure that we do indeed bring an end to all those evil and terrible things like patriarchy, like violence against women, that we continue to do in our country. And with these words, we say we want to strengthen the resolve of the women of our country that they must never stop for active citizenry they must never stop from prosecuting their struggle until this struggle is won. But we are also saying that we want the men of our country to join in this struggle, to join hands with the women of our country to make sure that there is true and full emancipation for the women of our country. With that, I say, Malibongwe! Malibongwe! Amandla! Amandla! Forward with the women of our country, forward! Forward with women's empowerment, forward! Amandla!